broadcasting from Park Avenue in New York City. Brought to you by Global Wealth Office at Nest Seekers International and Classique Moderne. This is Peace and Good Wealth. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Peace and Good Wealth. This is Lloyd Carlos, and hello, Colin, and hello, Perry. How is everybody doing today? Yes, good? Yeah. So today we have a really special guest, a photographer who is not only very artistic, but also is a multidisciplinary artist as well, and who's also launched a book lately. We are proud and we are pleased to present Luisa Opalesky to our audience on the podcast. Hey, Luisa, how are you doing?
Hello. Feeling good.
So Luisa, let's start with a little bit of a background because there's a lot that I'd love to be able to cover with you. You are a photographer. And you've studied photography at Parsons School of Design. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
So, and that's a fantastic school, obviously. You were also mentored there by George Pitts, as I understand it, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about sort of the process of, I think a lot of people understand photography and some people have it as hobbies, but literally studying it as an art form is, I would think is a different, might be a different sort of process altogether. So let's talk about photography and George Pitts. And what are the things that as a student might have been an important sort of aspect of learning that sort of influenced your passion and your career?
I love this question, and I could talk about school for a long time, and I really highly recommend it when anybody's kind of on the fence, because it's really cool to say, like, I don't need school, fuck that, like, I'm anti. No, you actually learn so much about the art of photography, art history in general. I could have totally majored in art history. That's how enveloped I was with all of those little liberal arts classes surrounding photography. I even took a class called Old Weird America, which was about folk music. Brilliant. And it really targeted different, it ping-ponged a lot of ideas for my own work and for a thesis. And George Pitts was my thesis professor, but he also taught a class called Picturing Sexuality, which changed everyone's life that took it. Because it was really about mood and emotion and watching films that were, somewhat uncomfortable for people. And, he would just come up with these incredible assignments that we would all share. And, it really pushed us so much. But he was the kind of guy that was so kind and so generous and so welcoming to, pretty much everybody's ideas. So everybody felt comfortable.
George Pitts was also multidisciplinary artist in his own right? So I think he was looking at it as well from like a storytelling point of view, from an emotional, human connection point of view as well, and not just photography for the sake of photography.
He was the coolest guy I've ever seen in a academic place. He would wear a Gautier like trench coat, and on the inside there would be this like silk tapestry of nude paintings, and then the outside would be like just really casual, like gray. Anyway, he was just high top hair. He worked at Vibe magazine forever. He was a painter. He started off as a painter. I actually have one of his drawings tattooed on me because after he passed, I was just like, I need George Pitts on my skin forever. But yeah, he was just the coolest. And he was like a dandy. He's
So before, did your perspective of photography as art change dramatically from before, that era, thinking about, studying, and then, being transformed by someone who has a much bigger sort of like idea of photography than or was it always for you such a much bigger concept? Did you have an angle in photography that you wanted to do prior to that?
Always. Yeah, always. I was always really attracted to the body and movement and the relationships between people in the photographs. So, and again, like pushing boundaries, like whenever I would shoot. But George was the kind of guy, and like a great teacher does, is they allow you to explore. So, there can be a lot of teachers that kind of, they don't make you feel comfortable, or they're very critical, or, it's like a parent. It's like a parent that's like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And they're neutral and they're cool, even keeled. They're not like, you should do this, you should do that. So I think that it had probably always been there, but George really facilitated in me like the comfort and the exploration and the want to kind of like, try some things that were probably not recommended before. Yeah, like he introduced me to David Lynch's work. I had seen Mulholland Drive when I was really young, and it freaked me out so much that I was obviously enthralled, and I couldn't wait to see more. But George really had the language to explain why it was so important, and George also taught me how to speak, and how to write and how to express yourself and be really vulnerable in a cool way.
So there's where in the process of learning, where does technique and all of that, the theoretical stuff, technique and the understanding composition and all of that stuff, how does that blend into the impact that you want and to be able to communicate? Because there are two components. A lot of people, are looking at technique, and technique is really great, but it doesn't feel like anything. And there are people who have a lot to say, but the technique is not quite there to really be able to communicate clearly what it is that they're trying to do. Where in the process of studying, is it a continuous process of like refining your technique and making sure that what you'd like to get across is coming out, or how does that? How do you determine? I think this is probably the simplest way to answer the question. After you've taken a lot of photos and you're sorting through them, how do you determine which ones are good to you?
I love this question, and I think about it a lot in terms of music too. With the musicians, like Miles Davis, perfect example. Somebody who went to Juilliard and obviously studied Bach and everything, but he was playing on at 42nd Street with Bird, and that was the education. So obviously a balance of both is kind of ideal, which is why I went to school and I wasn't a complete vigilante. I knew I wanted to take a lighting class and all these different like Photoshop and learning about the camera, but honestly, like I'm 37 now, and I have a lot of experience shooting at this point, and for me, it's all about exploring and pushing yourself with your subject. I mean, I've done still photography, and that was much more technique. I was shooting Hasselblad, 501c, film quality, light meter, all of the things. But again, if you don't make it a daily practice of just trying everything and failing and trying again and then kind of getting it and then messing up again, what's the point?
Right.
So it's
well,
really
I think,
a balance.
People think that art is, when we produce art, it's just, okay, we did it and it's there and it's done. And I think part of what they don't see that artists do is that they fail a lot.
Yeah.
My favorite one is favorite art story is, whenever I listen to somebody who is doing a tour of museums, and they're saying that, well, Cezanne did this, and he says, and look at this particular painting. If you look at his head, the head is smaller than the hands. What is he trying to say? And I'm chuckling in the back, thinking, he had a bad day. He probably hid it in some basement somewhere and somebody picked it up. He didn't want anyone to see it, but that day was particularly bad, because not everything that an artist produces is really for consumption. And I think, part of like when an artist is trying to finish a painting, they don't want anyone to see it yet because it's not done. And I think same thing with photography. But there are some sort of bounds, I think. So one of the questions is, when you're taking a photograph, for professional photographs, for whatever job is, let's say Interview magazine asked you to do a photo of a particular person. Is that different from if you're doing something that you'd want, that's really focused on the art or types of photographs that you'd like artistically? Are those two different disciplines, or is that the same thing?
I mean, I see them as the same thing, but the only difference is that there's more structure around an editorial. So you have a stylist, you have the makeup team, you have the hair, you have the, mood boards I hate, but we have the mood boards. And people really do have to kind of have a schedule within that. So when I'm shooting, I'm not thinking about any of that. I'm really just riffing off of like ideas that what I'm seeing brings it all to life.
Are there certain for me, when I'm taking a photo of a person, my favorite ones are the ones that show me something that I see in them, but they don't necessarily see, because the moment the camera is on, people put this facade that they feel is like, this is the right thing. And I keep saying, well, that's actually not the better part of you.
Yeah.
The natural part of you is actually much more interesting and nicer, and you're trying to capture that. But there are also people, beautiful people, that sometimes don't photograph as well. And there are people who are, maybe in plain sight seem, like ordinary people, but they, in front of the camera, they're fantastic.
K. Moss.
Right. So yes. Well, so are there certain people that, are easier to photograph, for you, or are there types of, or maybe personalities of people that sometimes, become an obstacle to a good, like a good portrait, not just for a magazine, but for artistic purposes, much more interesting. What are you looking for?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I've only really struggled with one person, and I'm not going to name them, but it was on a...
It wasn't me.
No. It was on a Times shoot, and I really struggled because of this heightened sensitivity towards the obsession of the way that the photos were going to turn out. And I just find that really like interesting, and it really messes with the process of the way that I shoot, because I'm not shooting digitally. It's like all these people on the streets with their iPhones, like, can I see it? Can I see it? Oh, what does that look like? That's what kills photography for me. Is like, you just have to trust, be yourself, and trust that somebody's going to see you in this sincere way. Like you were saying, They see something you don't see. So, I mean, my ideal subject is somebody who's comfortable with themselves and also willing to be open to ideas and collaborate. Like, that's everything.
Now, we say that nobody likes to look at their own photos, but I challenge, that notion. I think some people are very, very interested in seeing themselves in photos.
I'm obsessed with looking at photos of myself, even the ones where I look like, I don't know, like a tire. It's just like, yeah, it's fascinating.
Well, I think that's because you're looking at everyone in general. In that, I think that's what you're looking for when artistically you're looking, for that raw, sort of like idea of who people are, that actual personality. So having said that, let's talk a little bit about your book, Big City Nobody, which, could literally be anyone in this office. But that was my,
Hey, Siri.
yeah, Siri is just listening to sorry. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the concept of the book.
Yeah.
How did you have a plan for the book before you started it, or was it sort of like, okay, I have these photos, let me get started? How did the process start for you?
Well, it was during COVID when we all had a little bit more time. I was attempting street photography for the first time ever without an iPhone. So having like a 35 and a 120. So I could really explore, and I really, I say no iPhone because the iPhone can be really inconspicuous and you can really kind of get all of these hidden moments without being seen. And when you have a camera in front of your face, people are more aware. So I really wanted that challenge. And there were little seeds planted during COVID for sure, because I was just enjoying the streets being a little bit more empty and having true locals. It wasn't filled with these like horrific tourists everywhere. And I live in Chinatown, so Mott Street can get really wild with the, snookies or whatever.
Yes.
So,
and it's also, difficult to photograph because it's, it's with so many tourists and so much traffic, it's constantly moving. And sometimes, that almost split second of a moment that where you need something to just kind of like, stand still so that you could take this perfect shot is so much easier, to do when there's not a billion tourists running around, and who are, by the way, oblivious of what's going on anyway. Like we love, we love that about New Yorkers. It's like we're oblivious about everybody else except when other people are trying to do things.
or getting in your way.
Yes, getting in your way, exactly. So tell us, what will we find if somebody who doesn't have the book? What will they find in the book itself?
You're going to find an array of portraits of people and then portraits of artifacts in the city that are all on the same exact level of importance to me. Like, I just think that everything is really fascinating when you have a viewfinder. Like, for me, it just romanticizes things that would normally like really piss me off. Like, it's like like what we were just saying, like when you're trying to get to point A to point B and someone's kind of, a little slow or so. The viewfinder, like having a camera has really helped me kind of slow down and kind of like, I don't know, feel grateful for what I have around me, even though it's utter chaos. So yeah, I think that it's really just like a raw, romanticized, gritty New York that I love in the movies from the 70s and the 80s, like Cassavetes films or, Scorsese films like Mean Streets. It has this like grit and it's all 35 millimeter. So it's like, it just lends itself completely to the photos.
And it's interesting that, you just, when you mentioned before the difference between the iPhone and the camera, and I haven't thought about it. With an iPhone, most people, if they go to a concert, they use their iPhone. They don't see a thing at all, right? Because it's just sort of like recording. It's that's it. And you don't even look at, they don't see anything. But when you're taking a photo with a camera, you have to see everything. You have to look at that viewfinder and see what's in the background, what's in the foreground, what's off the what's off the scale and all that, and all of that stuff. And in some way, in a lot of ways, it forces you to be in that moment, because the camera sees what it sees. And what I think also a lot of people who are probably not very much into photography, what they don't understand is what the camera sees is not necessarily what our eyes see.
Absolutely. Depending on the lens, for sure.
So for me, my issue when with taking photographs is that I have a very romantic eye. So I see things in like rose colored lenses. Everything is beautiful, and then when the film, when the photo comes out, I'm like, what is that? Because the camera is telling you me the truth. But I think that's sort of like a discipline that and also experience matters with that. So let's talk about some other things. You're also a dancer. So let's talk about dance. So let's talk about dance and movement and how that lends into the art of photography as well. You know? So you as a dancer, you understand movement and sort of like communicating things through movement. Is that something you try to capture, in your photography? Let's start with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, if it's not a conversation that I'm having that feels somewhat like moody or emotional, or there's this like film noir-esque thing happening where it's not so much movement, it's all movement. And I'm really inspired by hair and clothes and the way that the body can transform into these different shapes. I think, in the book, there's a lot of photos there's a couple photos of shoes for the same reason, because, like a shoe in air, I just see things like similarly. So I am obsessed with the body. It never gets old to me. Clothed, nude, completely masked, like whatever it is. I just think that, these different shapes, it's like very painterly to me. And I love painting with bodies and with these, like. Well,
you're a choreographer, as well, and
movement director.
And so you're. I think one of the things about dancers and choreography and painting is and art and photographs. We all talk about lines, right? How great some certain lines are. How to make things better if you're trying to express something. Those are things that the director or a choreographer will see, that makes sometimes in photography what makes it pop or makes it say something more than just a plain sort of like posed shot. How about normal day-to-day sort of movements? How does that apply to the artistry of being a photographer?
I'm always looking at people for inspiration, especially on the Upper West Side and Chinatown, in these like iconic neighborhoods where it really does feel like more local. Like on the Upper West Side, you're gonna get some oldies, and you've got like the walkers and the rollators. I love a rollator because you have this like hunched over back and these arms that are like usually really skinny, and they've got their stuff in their rollator, and the feet are kind of dragging. Like all of that inspires me so much, and I'm known to follow somebody for a couple blocks just to kind of get that. I mean, it's like kind of like being an actor or a director. I feel like a kinship to like those characters like in Midnight Cowboy, like Ratso Rizzo. Like he definitely went around Midtown and studied some, down on their luck people that were limping or,
Well, there's something about
beautiful.
Photography, as we that allows us to, in a lot of ways, put ourselves in other people's shoes. What I love, for instance, whenever I pass by streets at night where they have just turned on some lights in these different apartment buildings, and sort of like wondering, if I had a camera and I'm taking a picture of them, what are they doing? Is it someone who's like just gotten home, microwaving some food, or is it somebody who's like cooking something, or maybe just, either feeding their cat or whatever it is? Like there's all of these multiple stories that are happening, and taking, photos of, people like you've described, it almost feels like you're stepping into a little bit in their world.
100%.
And you're seeing them in that light, versus just as a part of such a big world where everything's happening. Now, talking about that, you also had other works. Let's talk a little bit about Daddy's Daydream, and that is a multi-layered. It dives into parental relationships. Was that how much of that sort of like was a reflective of what your life was, and what brought about that project?
I mean, that's definitely my most vulnerable project to date. And I think, again, like I'm just always trying to challenge myself. And that was probably the biggest challenge, to put that work in the public, because it's so much of the way that I was raised and the dynamic between mom and dad. My dad is 30 years older than my mom, and my mom had me when she was 19, so my dad was 50. Obviously, that in itself, just that like fundamental fact, is going to be an interesting one in terms of, what information I was getting. But my dad is kind of like the person that I'm the closest to in my family, really, two calls a day type of thing. And yeah, I was sort of like examining the way, I was just so enamored by him, and the way that he would talk about women, or the way that he would collect certain things, the way that he, I had like the Madonna sex book when I was like 12.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, when you were 12 also, you had another obsession, which was manicures.
Oh, I was the kid doing manicures at like a yard sale on rollerblades.
Oh my God.
So like I would like find the kids. I would only do manicures on kids because the women were like, I'm not fucking trusting this child with like, no. But I would do manicures on rollerblades, and so I was obsessive with my own nails.
Which also led you to another to one of your other projects, right?
Nail. The Beauty Trilogy.
Yes, the Beauty Trilogy. So let's talk about that because is it the Beauty Trilogy? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What was in it, and what was the concept behind that?
That was the project I was referring to with the still life.
Yes.
With the Hasselblad, everything's square. That really came about with my obsession with wigs and high heels from basically doing nightlife in my 20s. I was collecting all of these like artifacts, which is what I call them. I would go to Fantasy World. I don't know if you guys remember Fantasy World.
Yes.
You do?
Yes, of course.
Okay, obsessed that you know what that is. I would buy all the wigs from Fantasy World. And
I think I actually bought a wig from Fantasy World for Halloween.
Which one?
It was a short sort of, what
Bob?
do you call that? Yeah, Bob. Because I was going to be a sort of like a kung fu geisha.
So black.
Yes,
Bob.
yes.
Live.
And the funny part is that when I took a picture and I brought it to the office says, "Oh my God, I look like one of my office mates." Same hairstyle.
So fun.
But less modest. Let me put it that way. But anyway, so sorry, continue.
So, okay, speaking of bobs, I would buy every color bob. So ginger, blonde, black, brunette, purple was one of my favorites, and then bright red. And I would bring the bobs kind of like all over the country. Like whenever I was doing a trip, I would bring the wigs with me. And one of the places that I photographed them was in Pound, Virginia. I don't know if anybody knows where that is. It is deep south, like right next to Tennessee. And I put some of the wigs on cows, some of the farm animals. I would put the bobs, like string them like a clothesline. And I just had so much fun with not photographing people for the first time and having so much control with these objects and having like a couple of assistants like helping me. And I just loved having that control and being like, oh, a little to the left, like, oh, put this. No, the purple bob needs to go next to the pink bob. And I would just like hours and hours every day play with these wigs and photograph them. Turned into a project.
So the objects were basically the subjects, right? The personality behind them. Now let's talk about other influences. you also work with Ryan McGinley, right? So
Yeah.
just, let's talk a little bit about that. What was that like?
Okay, fun story. I started interning for Ryan when I was 19, freshly in New York City at Parsons. And I'm pretty sure the first day I went in for an internship, I had like lost my virginity the night before. I was like feeling crazy. I definitely was new to everything. So it was like this. You know how things happen in threes? I know they
Yes,
say that in The
that's what
White
they
Lotus,
say.
but
That's,
yeah.
that's what they say for deals either. Yeah, also, but I'm not entirely sure that's true. But okay, let's believe that it is. Okay.
Yeah, I forget what else. It was like I rode a bicycle for the first time in New York City. It was like a man's bike. I had to ride to the dentist. There were just so many things going on surrounding starting working for Ryan. And I really was pushed into this other world that I felt very comfortable in, but I also was learning so much so quickly. I think Ryan's like secret power is like really knowing how to pick people and then also giving them task after task and challenge after challenge without you even thinking like, oh my God, this is terrifying. You just do it and then you learn. And it's really quite fluid and kind of like, it's like when you throw a baby into the pool and they don't even know how to walk yet. They're not going to drown, you know?
Right.
They learn how to swim to the other side somehow.
They have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like,
it's basically into the fire, and you go as you can. So really quick, almost like a quick questions.
Yeah,
So
hit me.
first one is favorite person to photograph or photographed so far.
I think Isabelle Huppert was my favorite.
Okay.
Year made.
Why?
Okay, first of all, it was 20 minutes. It was a 20-minute shoot. It felt like hours of time. Like we had like gone into this portal of, I felt like I knew her my whole life and we were having like a, laugh among the ladies. Like, and it was just us in this giant theater. So it was indescribable.
Favorite non-human to photograph?
I would say the blonde wigs.
The blonde wigs. About favorite project?
I have to say, a movement directing Brad Pitt in White Sands, New Mexico. Unbelievable experience.
Well, anything Brad Pitt probably would be an amazing experience.
Yeah, great.
And also not such a bad subject to be photographing, I would say, right? How about not, the other one, least favorite project or stuff?
Least favorite project? I don't know, like a Sprite campaign in Bangkok. Bangkok was great. That was the best part.
Yeah, it's just
But the Sprite
Sprite
campaign,
thing, right?
oh my God.
least non-human subject.
Wait, what?
The least non-human subject to photograph. Anything?
The least non-human
No,
subject?
well, I guess it's Sprite, right? Maybe we already,
Sprite!
Okay, how about the least human type subject? I know you wouldn't name names, but
Oh, you want to know who sucked?
no, it could be also just a profession. Just so if we don't want to name names, obviously it's not Brad Pitt, but
Oh. An actor.
an actor.
TV actor.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. All right. So I wish we had a lot more time. I think we've really just scratched
There's no
the
way that we
surface.
just did 30 minutes.
Yeah. It's so
Oh.
weird, right?
Yeah.
And in any way, so in any case, let's where do you go from here? Where what's in the future for you? Where are we going to find you? Where can we find your next projects? How can we follow you? All
I
of that
was
stuff.
just going to say, I'm going to a massage right now. It's 90-minute with my best
Okay.
friend. So you'll find me there
Yes,
at Spa
okay.
Ming. I am so just here for the ride. I'm always going to be taking photographs no matter what. On my deathbed, you'll see me. I'm like, but I would love to write a story and direct a film. I'd love to sing some jazz tunes in my 60s. And I love a stage.
Mizrahi. I don't know why I'm blanking. He's doing that now too, right? He was, from
At the
fashion.
Carlisle.
Yeah, from fashion to that, and he loves it.
There's something so beautiful about being able to belt a tune, letting your soul bear with a song.
That's how I feel sometimes when I'm, I always say that I don't know why, but for whatever reason, all of a sudden I just, burst out things, singing.
Look at you in the light.
Well, my favorite one is whenever I have, I feel anxiety with work, and this always happens. I just go, I don't know why I'm frightened. I just start doing Sunset Boulevard all of a sudden, all over in my head.
Billy Wilder is also a mentor to me in like the cinematic world that I don't know him, but Norma Desmond.
Norma Desmond, yeah. I would love for them to bring back the turban so I can get rid of the hats.
Okay, so where you're going to see me next is at Sunset Boulevard screening, and I will invite you.
Great, fantastic. Well, I think actually what I'm thinking right now is you should probably be a lot more of a regular for us.
I would love to come back and sing with you.
Yeah, but I think it would be great to just have when we have guests, there are different perspectives. Because literally, you deal with personalities all the time. We deal with personalities all the time as well. And it's really just, fun to have conversations with people that have different views of life and different passions. It's not just one thing. But we can talk about, dance. We can talk about theater. We can talk about film. We can talk about cooking. We could talk about the streets of New York and all of the grit and the passion and the love that sort of like comes along with living in a beautiful city like
New York. Pharmacies. Huge, amazing topic. Bigelow's or Zittimers? What do we prefer?
Zittimers.
Love.
And on that note, thank you again, Luisa Opalesky.
Thank you.
It's lovely having you here. And that's it for us, for this week, for Global Wealth Office and for Classic Modern. This is Lloyd Carlos wishing you peace and good wealth.